Okay, so thank you all very much, and those of you who are listening, I appreciate you being on this call, and I look forward to the opportunity to convey a little bit about what we're doing and the enthusiasm that we have for it and why we think this work is so important. Um, the book, The Emotional Life of Your Brain, that was mentioned is a book that summarizes the results of about 30 years of research on the brain and emotion. And it begins with a question that I asked at the very early part of my career, which is a question that still motivates much of what we do in my laboratory. And the question is a really simple one, and that is, why are some people resilient in the face of adversity and other people vulnerable? Why do some people have trouble in response to life's slings and arrows? Why are they unable to cope effectively with adversity? And why is it that other people seem to cope much more skillfully and don't react in a way which compromises their ability to function effectively? Those are questions about the nature of individual differences, the nature of differences among us in how we respond to emotional challenges. And that is a question which I think is probably the most salient question about emotion when we think about it. We are always struck by how different people are in response to the same kinds of life predicaments. And so it turns out that those differences among people are critical in understanding the origins of temperament and personality. They are essential for understanding who might be vulnerable to certain kinds of psychopathology, to particular kinds of psychiatric illnesses. It also turns out that the answer to those questions has important bearing on our physical health. We know that happier people are healthier, and why that is the case is something that has been extremely interesting to us. And so the fact that there are these individual differences in how we respond to emotional challenges appears to be important for our physical health as well as our mental health. And finally, we're particularly interested in optimal human functioning. And one of the conjectures that is central to the work that we do is that health, both mental and physical, is not simply the absence of illness, but it really is something more. We can all do better than where we currently are. And if we're honest with ourselves, we're all suffering from mild forms of various kinds of disorders. We don't have to think about them in quite that way, but there's opportunity for all of us. And so one of the related questions is, given that there are these individual differences, how can we nudge people along the continua toward more optimal functioning, toward the expression of healthier qualities of mind? And so this is something that has been extremely important to us. So let me begin in a more detailed way by providing a description of perhaps two of the emotional styles that I talk about in the book. I should say that in the book there are 6 emotional styles that are featured, and these are not styles that we've read about before in the popular press. They're not things like introversion and extroversion or optimism and pessimism. These are styles that are directly based on our knowledge of the brain. The constructs of personality, like introversion and extroversion and optimism and pessimism, were derived entirely in the absence of anything we know about the brain. Now, it's true that scientists have subsequently asked how those characteristics may be related to brain function and structure, But the strategy that is taken in this book is really completely opposite. We start with the brain, and we ask, what can the brain tell us about the nature of individual differences in emotional style? And let's construct a typology of emotional styles based upon an informed neuroscientific perspective. And so this is something that, to the best of my knowledge, has really never been done before, and it is the product of a long series of investigations that have been conducted over the past 3 decades. So let me start by describing the resilience style. Resilience can be thought of as the rapidity with which we recover from adversity. The rapidity with which we recover from adversity. So individuals who are more resilient recover more rapidly. All of us, in response to certain kinds of challenges, will show emotional responses. We will display those responses in our experience, in our behavior, and in our biology. And it's absolutely normative to show those responses. In fact, there's reason to believe that were we not to show those responses, it could be very maladaptive. So we all show those responses, but we differ tremendously in the extent to which those responses persist and perseverate and linger beyond the point where they're helpful or necessary. So let's take a very concrete example. Let's say that you have a difficult conversation with someone who's important to you. It could be a spouse, it could be a child, it could be your boss. Some people, after having such a conversation, are jangled and upset and distressed for quite a long period of time. It may last minutes, hours, even several days. Those are individuals for whom we would say that they have a very slow recovery. They're unable to come back to baseline quickly. Other people, in response to the same kind of situation, may have a transient response. They may show changes that are appropriate to that immediate situation, but they're able to very rapidly return back to baseline. Now, it turns out that those differences among individuals are very important for identifying important characteristics of their emotional life. Individuals who have a slower time to recover, in fact, are less resilient in many ways. They are more anxious, and they, in studies that we've done, show biological differences which suggest that they may have certain kinds of deleterious health outcomes in measurements of what we call peripheral biology, biology below the neck, which may be important for physical health. Whereas individuals who recover more quickly seem to do better and seem to have the opposite kind of disposition. Let me mention one other kind of emotional style by way of introduction. In many ways, it's the flip side of resilience, and we call it the outlook style. The outlook style refers to the extent to which positive emotions can be maintained over time. So imagine that you've had a very warm, loving conversation with a spouse or your offspring in the morning, and for some people that positive interaction really beautifully colors a good part of their day, and they approach the day with lightness and energy and goodwill and warm-heartedness. Whereas other individuals may have a conversation which they would regard as a very positive conversation, but the effects don't linger very long. They just don't last. It's much more fleeting, and the individual comes back to a more dysphoric baseline pretty quickly. We've done research with patients with major depression, and one of the things that we find in these individuals is that in response to a particular stimulus in the environment, which is a positive, a stimulus that elicits positive emotion, depressed individuals actually show a change in the centers in their brain which are important for positive emotion. They activate those regions. But the difference between a depressed and a non-depressed individual concerns the time course of those activations. So among depressed individuals, the activations are fleeting. They don't last very long. They come back to baseline quickly, and they're unable to be maintained over time. Whereas individuals who report high levels of well-being show sustained activation in these brain regions, in these circuits. Their activations persist for a much longer duration of time. And it turns out that those differences in the time course of activation in the brain accounts for a lot of the variation in the reported experience of people in terms of their overall levels of happiness and well-being. So these variations in the brain that represent how quickly you recover from adversity and how long positive emotion is maintained turn out to be very central in regulating the emotional balance of an individual. One of the important questions that we've asked in our research is, given that there are these individual differences among people, how can we make people, is there a way to actually influence where a person falls along these continua? Is it possible to nudge a person, if you will, toward a more positive emotional style? And we think that there is, and we actually believe, based on everything we know about neuroscience, that well-being actually is best regarded as a skill. It's a skill that can be enhanced through training. And one of the domains where we have actually found some wonderful insights about how such training may be accomplished actually comes from the contemplative traditions of the East. And this is where my relationship, as it was mentioned in the introduction, my relationship with His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been very inspirational to me, both as a scientist and as a human being. The Dalai Lama and his tradition holds that certain kinds of positive qualities of the mind, like kindness and compassion, are in fact trainable skills. And it turns out that the neuroscience really is just amazingly consistent with that view. The circuits in our brain that I described as part of the resilience and outlook styles are among the most plastic circuits that we know of in the brain. These are circuits which are shaped by experience. Our brains are either wittingly or unwittingly continuously being influenced by forces around us. Our brains are constantly being shaped. Most of the time it's unwittingly, and the invitation here is that we can all take more responsibility for our own brains. We can actually change our brains to cultivate more positive habits of mind and develop more beneficial emotional styles. So recent research that we've conducted in our laboratory indicates that the neural basis for the resilience style, for example, it can be dramatically influenced by certain kinds of meditation practice, particularly compassion meditation, which is the cultivating the wish for others to be happy and for others to be free of suffering. and the systematic cultivation of that kind of compassionate orientation through mental training, which can be done in a completely secular way, actually changes the brain and influences these circuits to shift a person to a more resilient kind of emotional style. So those are two emotional styles by way of example, the resilient style and the outlook style. And in the book, I describe 4 other emotional styles that together play a very important role in shaping the nature of who we are as living human beings. These styles, again, all are rooted in basic neuroscientific research, and they all describe continua along which every person varies. So to be clear about this, we all have each of these 6 emotional styles, but we all differ in where we fall along each of these 6 continua. And an individual, once she or he has more knowledge of where they fall on these different continua, may be able to actually, through various kinds of training, influence where they fall, if where they fall is not as optimal as it might be. So just to very briefly, I won't go into as much detail here, but very briefly tell you about the other 4 emotional styles. One we call the style involving sensitivity to context, or the context style. And what this style refers to is a person's propensity to take their current context into account in regulating their emotional responses. So the way we behave toward our spouse emotionally is presumably different than the way we would behave toward our boss. Or if we're in a very familiar environment, the way we respond emotionally may be different from how we respond emotionally if we're in a really strange and unfamiliar environment. So those are different contexts which play a role in shaping our emotional responses. And some people are very aware of the context and are able to shape their responses appropriately, and other people are less aware of their context. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder of context primarily, where individuals have a difficult time taking into account their current context, and so they could be in a perfectly safe environment in their hometown, and if they hear a siren go by from a police car or fire engine, they may have a panic attack because it introduces flashbacks of a traumatic period from their past, and this really represents a difficulty in taking into account their current context in regulating their emotional responses. Another style we call social intuition, and social intuition refers to how sensitive a person is to the social signals of others. Other people give off social signals through their body posture, their facial expressions, their tone of voice. Those are important clues about the emotional state of others. And some of us are really good at reading those clues, and other of us are not so good. Individuals on the autism spectrum often have a difficult time decoding those social signals, and as a consequence have a difficult time with certain kinds of communication. And so reading these social signals is something important for our everyday behavior. The next style is self-awareness, and what self-awareness here refers to is the sensitivity of an individual to their own internal cues, to their own emotions. Sometimes people display emotions and actually don't realize what they're displaying, what emotions they're actually experiencing, what emotions are waxing and waning through their bodies and minds. And others of us are more acutely aware of our internal emotional states. There are ways to measure this, and there are people who have a really difficult time describing their emotional states. These are individuals that have been called alexithymics in the scientific literature, this again is tied to specific neural circuits and plays an incredibly important role in our emotional life. And finally, the last style is attention. We don't normally think of attention as part of emotion, but when we really pause to reflect on this, it's not an accident that we tend to orient our attention to emotionally salient features of our environment. And people differ tremendously in different aspects of attention, which dramatically influences how they respond to emotional cues in their environment. One of the dimensions of attention ranges from being very focused to being very scattered. This dimension is something that plays a very important role in our emotional style, largely because attention is a building block for virtually all other kinds of learning. And so if we're doing emotional learning, attention is a necessary substrate for that. And so I've included it as part of these 6 emotional styles. So just to summarize, each of these 6 emotional styles is rooted in specific pathways in the brain. There are differences among people in where they fall along each of these 6 continua. Every person has each of these 6, but we all differ in where we fall along each of these 6 dimensions. And probably the most important point is that every one of these dimensions is plastic. And what we mean by that is that through various kinds of systematic training, we can actually influence where we fall along these 6 emotional style dimensions. And individuals can literally train their mind to become happier, to enjoy higher levels of well-being, and to suffer less by engaging in systematic practices that will literally influence the function and structure of these neural circuits, which will then in turn have important consequences for these emotional styles. So I think that I will pause here and see if there are any questions, and we can then go on from here depending upon the nature of the questions.
Richie, that's awesome. Just as a, here to facilitate, of course, but just as a participant, I'm scribbling notes so quickly because all of this has such great importance in my own work. So thank you for what you've presented thus far. Yes, there are a whole bunch of questions that have already come in, so it's a great time to break. I'll start off right away. Cammie Smalley asked a question along these lines, represents a couple other people who have asked a question similar to this, and that is, does our emotional style and where we fall on each of these 6 dimensions, if you could talk just a little bit more about how they are affected by aging, just to talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, that's a wonderful question, and thank you for asking it. We don't actually know in any kind of precise way how each of these styles changes with aging. We have a little bit of evidence on some of the styles, but not a lot. One of the things that we do know is that there are certain age-related changes in the brain normatively that will influence certain parts of the circuitry that influences some of these styles. And so, for example, the attention style, to the extent that it depends upon the deployment of resources that are subserved by the prefrontal cortex, there clearly are some age-related changes in the prefrontal cortex that potentially could play an important role in shaping aspects of attention. Another one is context. Context is something that is importantly regulated by the hippocampus, and that's an area where there are also well-known age-related changes. Exactly how those age-related changes, though, impact our ability to regulate our emotional responses based on context has not been extensively studied. What I will say is that I think that some of the normative age-related declines in certain of these brain systems can potentially be impacted through certain kinds of training that we know affects neuroplasticity throughout the lifespan. And so we can, I think, influence some of these age-related variations by engaging in systematic practices throughout our life that can potentially influence the neural systems which play an important role in emotional styles.
That's great. Super. Well, again, the questions are flying, so they're going to jump around from one interesting topic to the next. Rachel Green asks an interesting question. She is a long-term meditator, but says that she practices intermittently. So the question is, do the benefits of meditation accrue over time with her intermittent practice?
We don't precisely know the answer to that question. I would say that more regular practice, all the just integrating across many different studies suggests is better. It doesn't necessarily have to be long periods of practice, so even short periods of practice done regularly I think is very, very beneficial. But we don't, from a scientific perspective, we don't really have the evidence. Integrating across scientific studies as well as from my own experience with meditation, I would certainly say that as much consistent regular practice as possible is helpful.
That's great. Okay, thank you very much to all those who are practicing, or some folks have asked that question from the perspective of recommending it to their clients, so thank you for that. Richie, here's a question from Margarita Tarragona, I wanted to say it correctly, from Mexico, and her question is a very interesting one. There's so much talk about violent video games, and Margarita had said, touches on that some of the research around the impact or the effects of violent video game watching or rather playing, that evidence seems inconclusive. But Margarita points to the fact that how important the data that you found of how kindness and love can really change our brain. So Margarita asks, do you have an opinion, or do we know of research as to evidence that says that this impact of violent video games does, in fact, could potentially have a negative impact, and what that impact might be?
Yeah, it's again, thank you for the important question. It's really very timely and critical. To the best of my knowledge of this literature, I think that there's pretty compelling evidence at this point in time that violent video games can lead to an increase in aggressive behavior. So, I think the evidence is pretty persuasive. Certainly it's not bulletproof and airtight, but I think it's pretty persuasive. One of the things that this has stimulated us to consider is whether we can actually use video games to actually influence behavior in a positive and pro-social way. We're not going to change, I don't think, the use of digital technology among children as well as adults. I mean, actually, the demographics show that the largest percentage of video players is not children, but is young adults. We're not going to change their habits in terms of using this technology, but I think what we can influence is the availability of games that promote pro-social and positive qualities of mind. We've recently been funded by the Gates Foundation to develop video and computer games for middle school children to cultivate mindfulness and kindness and empathy in two different games. One game to cultivate qualities of mindfulness and attention, and the other game to cultivate empathy, kindness, and pro-social behavior. And we don't yet know whether these games are going to work in this way, but there's I think some reason to believe that we could use this kind of technology to influence behavior and to train the mind in positive and pro-social ways, and it's at least worth asking the question. And then if the results are encouraging, I think they will encourage game designers to begin to explore this space.
Oh, that's super. Well, let's stay on the technology track for a moment with another question. This comes in from Kate Wack from Geneva, Switzerland. And her question to you, Richie, is do you see the role of technology, particularly personal mobile phone technology, in enabling self-assessment of emotional states or emotional style?
It's a great question, and the answer is yes, I definitely do. One of the points that I tried to make in my book, The Emotional Life of Your Brain, is that the first and probably the most important ingredient for changing emotional style is awareness. Being aware of where you fall along these dimensions. Most people actually are not so aware. And if we can use technology to facilitate a person's awareness of where they fall on these dimensions, I think it could be helpful in cultivating positive change. We don't know how possible that will be with smartphone technology, for example, but again, I think it's very much worth exploring since this technology clearly is here to stay.
That's super. Another question, these questions are fascinating, aren't they? Maria Lectrek asked the question, kind of a direct question, is brain researching making traditional personality theory obsolete?
I would say, not to be too crass about it, but I would say yes to a large extent. I think that we are now in an era where we have learned quite a bit about the emotional brain, and I no longer think it's responsible to carry on serious academic discussions or discussions in a clinical context of emotions where we ignore this information. So I think this information could be very, very useful. When you think about psychological treatments that are used treatment contexts to treat psychiatric disorders, particularly empirically validated treatments. None of the treatments that are currently empirically well validated were developed at a time when we really knew much about the brain. And so they were developed in the absence of real insight from about the brain. And I think that we can actually do better now by taking into account an understanding of the brain. We can develop neurally inspired behavioral interventions that actually are based upon a serious knowledge of the brain. And I think today not to do that is really to be derelict in our responsibility, since this information is now available.
Oh, that's great. Returning to meditation is one of those, very, very positive interventions that you've now studied extensively. Mahesh Pamnani from Hong Kong asked the question, and here's the context of the question, that he's been practicing meditation for nearly 19 years, and the more he reads about it, and the more he understands the research that has come out of your lab, he just gets the sense if he's really missing something. But we all are faced with the habits we have to deal with, and things kind of take priority and so forth. And I think his real question is, do you have any advice on how to really fall in love with meditation to the degree that you can shift your mindset to really stick with meditation on a more regular basis?
Yeah, that's a great question, very difficult question. And I would say that one of the things that's potentially important is for a person to, there are many different kinds of meditation. I often, in the context of lay audiences, will say that meditation is kind of like sports. There are many different kinds of sports. Some are practiced solo, some are done in groups, some are more active, some are less active. And in many ways, meditation is like that. There are many different varieties. And I think that it's important for a person to discover for her or himself what style is most optimal for their own situation. We really, from a scientific perspective, we don't have much information about that. We ideally should be able to more optimally match an individual with the kind of practice that would be most efficacious for that person based upon her or his emotional styles. But we don't yet have that information. The other consideration is the importance of a teacher that you resonate with. And again, there are lots of wonderful teachers around, but how one person meshes with a particular teacher versus another is really a matter of taste and all kinds of complicated characteristics. And I don't think there's any real formula here other than to explore a bit and try on a couple of different approaches and see how they feel and see how it's working for you. And then once you find something that seems to be helpful, to stick with it for, I'd say at least 6 months. I mean, it sounds like you've been sticking with it for quite a bit longer, to see if there are some benefits.
That's super. It's great encouragement for all of us. Richie, we have a question from Virginia Hurley from New York. A very interesting research question around, are there any trauma studies related to this research, or any findings on the capability to train traumatized brains?
This is an issue we're just exploring now. It's a really important question. So we have a large project underway with individuals with post-traumatic stress, and we are exploring different interventions derived from contemplative traditions taught in a completely secular way, and looking at the impact of these both on symptoms as well as on the brain. There's been very little work, though, addressing this, and just really almost no serious neuroscientific research. So I suspect that in the next 5 years there'll be many more of these studies, but right now there really are essentially none, so we don't really know.
Okay. Well, very, very good. One thing that's clear to me is that if you're looking for research studies for the rest of your life and beyond, there clearly are so many great, interesting paths to follow, which is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does it feel that way? It feels that way, doesn't it?
Absolutely, definitely. Yep.
Well, I guess you know you're in the right spot when that's true. Here's a question that's in from Vincent Giolito. Interesting question, kind of ties to religion, and that is, if we replace the word meditation with prayer, is science about to explain the need or potential striving for religion?
Well, it's an interesting question, and we don't know whether the effects of prayer are the same or different than the effects of meditation. I suspect that there'll be elements that are similar and probably some elements that are different as well, although we don't really know from a scientific perspective. One of the things is that meditation is typically done in a very systematic way, when it's done regularly, it's done daily, for some length of time. Now, prayer can be done in this way too, but my understanding is that it typically doesn't, it's not as intensive a kind of commitment, if you will, as meditation. And maybe if prayer were done for the same amount of time, in the same intensive way, that its effects would be even more similar, but we just don't know at this point in time.
Okay, that's once again very interesting going forward. Good question. Deborah Brody asked a question about the different types of meditation, and is there a difference in the brain response and emotional style? So if we practice, for example, loving kindness meditation versus transcendental meditation, is there a difference in brain response and emotional style to note?
The answer is yes. There's definitely a difference that we can see in the brain produced by different kinds of meditation, unquestionably. We've done many studies where we have demonstrated, for example, taking long-term practitioners who have practiced for tens of thousands of hours and engage in many different kinds of meditation practice. So you can, the virtue of these individuals is that they know these practices very well. You can bring them into the laboratory and have them engage in different practices and see if there are differences in the brain within the same person, and the answer is there are. So depending upon what specific practice we're talking about, those differences are different. But it really underscores the heterogeneity among these different kinds of practices and the fact that they will work on different neural systems.
That's awesome. You know, I have a question I think I asked on behalf of a whole bunch of people. In your work and even in the book, Your Emotional Life of Your Brain, you talk about your own personal experience with carrying the flag of studying essentially the brain basis of emotion, that at one point in time it really was not popular and people weren't committed to it as you were in terms of really seeing the insights that would be available if we studied it. Just reflecting on the six emotional styles, could you just share a little bit of what it was that, and this is obviously a very big question that would be probably better suited for a Barbara Walters interview, but the question really is just what did you do, or how is it that you were able to stay the course and not get knocked off your horse as you were moving forward with this research when people in the early days might not have been as supportive as of course now people are?
Yeah, well, I've reflected on this a little bit, and I think that part of it was my own meditation practice. I've been meditating for more than 30 years.
Wow.
Actually, yeah, I went on my first meditation retreat in 1974. My meditation practice has, I think, helped me in being balanced in this way, and also trusting my intuitions about what was right, and having a quiet kind of confidence, not an arrogant confidence, but just a quiet kind of confidence that the direction that we were pursuing was a worthwhile direction, and being able to recover from adversity relatively quickly. This was a lonely path for a long time, and not just in affective neuroscience, but the work on meditation as well. So that there are sort of two big hurdles that I took on in my career, and I learned to address them, if you will, with warm-heartedness and not a lot of resistance, and being able to get back up when we were knocked down, which happened many times. And so I think that my own kind of being steeped in this tradition was very, very helpful in being able to stay the course, as you put it.
That's tremendous. It's clearly not a requirement of a scientist to practice what they research, but I know I speak for people who are commenting on it, that it is inspiring. And so thank you for sharing your personal connection to the work that you're researching. And thanks for carrying the flag.
Well, I'm happy to do it, and I really feel like that's precisely the reason I'm on the planet right now, is to do this work and to communicate its import, and it's one of the reasons I'm grateful for this opportunity.
Oh, that's tremendous. Well, here's the, speaking of just kind of the reference to the planet, the global impact of your work, Christina Gaiby asked the question. She's done some research herself on resilience and the impact of an individual and an environment and how it varies against across individuals. Her question is really around: do we see variances as across people who are in different cultures? Is there a cultural impact that might be different in the way people respond with their emotional styles, and maybe particularly around resilience, how quickly they bounce back? Is there a cultural impact that you've run across in your research?
Well, it's a very important question. My intuition is that there is a powerful cultural impact. Culture gets under the skin and into the brain, so to speak. Culture shapes brains. And this is something that is just beginning to be investigated scientifically. There is a very nascent but emerging field of cultural neuroscience, which is asking these kinds of questions. We really know very little about it, though, but from my own experience, just personally spending a bit of time in non-Western cultures and traveling throughout Asia extensively, particularly in India, as well as other Asian countries like Nepal and Bhutan. I think that there are profound cultural variations which will shape particularly the developing brain from when children are very, very young, and influence circuits that are important for different aspects of emotional style. I think that that's unquestionably going to be the case. We don't have the data in hand yet, but if you just look at the behavior of kids who are raised in these environments, you can see this in their behavior. And so I think that when we begin to look in their brains, I think we'll see some interesting differences.
That's tremendous. Richie, one compliment paid to one of the leaders, and any leader who's on our calls, are the number of questions that are asked. And we have so many, we could keep you for a long time. I'm going to, in fact, just ask you one more question. And then I just want to say to everyone before I ask that last question, to invite people, if you do have questions, we did this on our last call and with Adam Grant. And so we invite you, if there is a question that you say, boy, I really wish I could have got that, I could have asked that question, and it's still after you read Dr. Davidson's book or read more of his work, you still have that question. We invite you to send that question via email to info@IPPAnetwork.org. I think you know it, but I'll just spell it quickly. info@IPPA, IPPA network, network.org, and then we'll do our best to help you get that question answered, because we really appreciate your giving of yourself to share your question with us. So let's go with the last question. I know the answer to this, but it's an important question for everyone to know the answer to, Richie, and that is, Liza Robb asked the question. It is there more information in your book about cultivating positive emotional style shifts and particular contemplative practices for generating change around particular emotional styles? So do you have, you have guidance on interventions and help?
Yes, thank you for the question. And the answer is yes, there is a wealth of information in the book which provides very explicit suggestions and material related to strategies and interventions and training protocols for shaping and transforming different aspects of our emotional style. So I would encourage you to look at that, and for information about the latest cutting-edge work that we do, please visit our website, which is investigatinghealthyminds.org. All one word. Again, investigatinghealthyminds.org.
That's tremendous. And another website, at least that I found helpful, I want to make sure I have it right, Richie, is richardjdavidson.com. Is that right?
Yes, that is right.
Okay, there's some real interesting information about Dr. Davidson there as well. So you'll get your fill, grab your cup of coffee or milk or whatever it is that your beverage of choice, and look through those websites. I just, we'll wrap up here just to say, Richie, I really appreciate you making the time to be with us. We know, working with your office, how full your schedule is. And I can say that most of us here not only are impressed, all of us, I should say, are not only impressed with the breadth of the research you've done, but just your commitment to helping us apply it to our lives. So it's not just a research question, but it really truly is, how is it that we can improve our lives and the people that we either interact with or we serve as therapists or teachers and the like. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.